Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bob Unger, and we have a real treat today because we're actually going to talk to a guy who has some integrity. And these days, integrity, I don't care whether it's Republicans or Democrats, is a rare commodity. And since I'm a commodities investor, this is a guy worth investing in. Because integrity today is very, very low supply. I just interviewed a medical doctor, who expressed his honest opinion. And all these people commenting on it are saying that he should be arrested. He should be incarcerated because he doesn't agree with Tony Fauci. That is where we've come to. And anyone who questions all this nonsense, garbage, and propaganda going on with regard to Russia and Ukraine and NATO, they're called traitors. And the people calling them traitors are people who call themselves liberals. Wait a minute. I thought liberals are supposed to question authority. That's what the slogan was in the 1960s in the Vietnam War. Question authority. Question authority. They don't allow you to question anything. And they call me a fascist. I'm a fascist. I allow anyone to speak, as I'm now going to allow our guest, Daniel Kovalik. Is that the proper?
Yes, Kovalik. It's Slovak. Yeah.
I got you. Daniel is the author of a book called The Plot to Scapegoat Russia, How the CIA and the Deep State Have Conspired to Vilify Russia. And the facts are not quite what we're getting in the media. So let's go with our guest to the beginning. He is a very great thinker. He really is. I can tell just from our brief conversations. As a matter of fact, to be any kind of a thinker is something that's almost unheard of today. There's no thinking going on. It's a bunch of, the new official language of America is not English. It's bah, bah, that's their official language. So Daniel, give us a brief summary of your book, and then we're going to get into the details.
Great, Bob. First of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for that very kind introduction. Very much appreciated. So the book focuses, first of all, on the Russiagate, so-called Russiagate scandal, which claimed that the Russians somehow interfered in the 2016 elections. I believed then, and I believe now, and I think the facts have largely borne me out, that this was a manufactured scandal with little to no factual basis. In fact, one person joked it was a scandal without even any allegations. I mean, if you added up all the allegations and even believed them all, it was very, very weak tea, right? The claim was the Russians hacked a DNC computer, which exposed the fact that the DNC had unfairly put the finger on the scale for Hillary against Bernie Sanders. Again, there's no evidence that it was the Russians who did hack it. But again, even if they did, this would not be the crime of the century. And then there were claims, of course, that Russian trolls posted various posts on Facebook and Twitter. And again, it didn't amount to very many of any significance. And none of them were actually particularly partisan as to who to support. And then there was the Steele dossier, which purported to show Trump's connections with Russia. That Steele dossier has been debunked at this point. So there really it was a scandal with little basis, but the stench of it remains, right? And a lot of people still believe it. They believe that Russia interfered successfully in this 2016 election, that was the reason Hillary Clinton lost. And this motivates people now in terms of accepting the panic about Russia, right? And that was part of the point. So I think that to get to the crux of it, the Russiagate scandal was created for two reasons. One, It was created by the Clinton campaign, and we know this, that it was intentionally created by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party as an alibi for why Hillary Clinton surprisingly lost to Donald Trump, right? They could not blame themselves. They couldn't look at themselves and what they had done to lose that campaign. For example, that Hillary didn't even step foot in Wisconsin, a state she could have won. She attacked her own base, the working class people of middle America, as deplorables. Do you recall that? I mean, these were the people that have historically supported the Democratic Party, and she made it clear the Democratic Party wasn't interested in them anymore.
And now the Democratic Party is attacking truck drivers.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, the Democratic Party has made it clear they don't care about the American working class. And the working class did respond, by rejecting them. So, but they decided, that's too, we're not going to go there. We're not going to be honest and soul searching. So they said, okay, we'll blame Russia. And of course, the CIA and the FBI and other intelligence agencies went along with it because they had their own reasons for doing so. And the main reason, I think, was they feared that Trump was going to have some sort of rapprochement with Russia. I mean, he made it clear he didn't view Russia as this big bugaboo, as an enemy, and that he was willing to deal with Putin. And this scared the military-industrial complex because Russia is needed as this enemy, this historic enemy, to justify spending billions and billions of dollars on the military every year. And so they went along with it and they pushed it, the interesting character for me in it was James Comey, the head of the FBI at the time, who, by the way, probably was the one that also significantly derailed Hillary's campaign. Remember, a few weeks before the election, he released a letter saying we're still investigating Hillary's internal or personal servers because she had used them as Secretary of State for official business. This revelation probably did as much as anything to defeat her. It also came to light that the FBI had found some of her emails on Anthony Weiner's computer. Again, not quite helpful to Hillary Clinton. But all of a sudden, Comey, who, by the way, my liberal friends were saying in the run-up to the election, were saying, oh, he might have violated the Hatch Act, Comey, because what he did politically might have thrown the election to Clinton. But after the election, Comey's actions in that regard were forgotten, and now he becomes the hero because he starts going after Trump for the Russiagate allegations. And so he becomes a hero to the Democratic Party, and people even had T-shirts of him and all sorts of stuff. And so what's happened, and again, we can focus on this in many ways, but you and I have talked about this a bit even before this interview. You have this strange flip that happened because of the Russiagate scandal, and it's a very important one because you see it manifest right now. The Democratic Party base, particularly the kind of liberal intellectual base, went from years and years of distrusting the FBI and CIA, which of course they should distrust, and there's a lot of reasons to then endorsing the FBI and CIA as somehow heroes of democracy, right? And so now everything the CIA and FBI puts out, and again, much of that is propaganda, some of it true, some of it not, some of it completely fabricated. They're simply willing to believe it. And now you might even remember that Trump, for example, was criticized from liberals for not believing in his own intelligence agencies, right? Well, Kennedy had been applauded for that, right? Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, said he had been lied to by the CIA. there's some stories that, he was going to dismantle the CIA. I'm not sure how true that is, but in any case, he became very suspicious of it. To this day, he's applauded for that. But now to distrust the CIA and the FBI is considered, again, treasonous. And all this is important because, and again, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, because of now what's happening in Ukraine, where the CIA, amongst other actors, has been very active since, particularly, well, for a long time, but certainly since 2014, has been working with various armed groups in Ukraine, including the Azov Battalion, which is a neo-Nazi battalion. And this has led to violence against Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. 14,000, by the way, 14,000 Ukrainians, mostly Russian-speaking, in the Donbass region where these two breakaway republics are. 14,000 lost their lives since 2014 in a war, a low-intensity war between Kiev and, again, their own people in that region. But now you get the impression that what happened last week, this invasion by Russia, which of course, I cannot defend, but people think that was the beginning of the war, and it's not. And we just have to be honest about it. That war's been going on since 2014.
And didn't the CIA engineer the coup that took over Ukraine with Zelensky?
Exactly. Originally, they put in power Poroshenko, and that was in 2014. And we know this. Victoria Nuland is now, again, a retread back in the Biden administration. There's phone calls that were recorded where she talked about helping quarterback the change in government in 2014. And one of the things she did, and again, that she said she did, is make sure that while neo-Nazis didn't have, a central role in the government, she made sure that they did have a side role in the government because they were seen as allies, really, against Russia. And again, Biden was part of that. Obama was obviously part of that. And so if you really want to blame someone for what's happening right now, a lot of the blame should go to the Obama-Biden administration, and yes, to the CIA under them. And again, what's interesting to me is that instead of that, what I'm seeing on my social media feed, and I guess it shows who my friends are because I am, from the left. I mean, that's true. But what I'm seeing them post are things suggesting that it was Trump's fault that this all happened. I mean, he's not president anymore. He hasn't been president for over a year. This is firmly an Obama-Biden production. And yet somehow now this guy who's, in his home in Florida is now being blamed for this crisis. And again, to me, it offends me as someone who cares about facts and the truth. Again, whatever you say about Trump, there's a lot of things you can criticize him for, and I would and do. His policy that he wanted to have towards Russia, I think, was a breath of fresh air. I think Russia could have been dealt with. I think they could have been a partner in many things, and they were. We have to remember, after 9/11, and I talk about this in my book, Putin was the first world leader to call George W. Bush and offer condolences after 9/11. He offered help in the war on terror, and he gave it, particularly in Afghanistan, where Russia still had assets, right? And as Stephen F. Cohen, I don't know if he's a figure you're familiar with or maybe even interviewed, the late, great Stephen F. Cohen, a Russian, I think it's fair to say one of the great American Russian experts and Sovietologist who recently died, talked about, and he was very good friends with Gorbachev and an advisor to Gorbachev, by the way. His impression was that Putin and others in the Kremlin were just simply baffled by the animosity that the U.S. showed against them. And again, that animosity, which again, a lot of it comes from many places, but again, one of the seeds of it was this Russiagate scandal.
You mentioned Kennedy.
Yeah.
Well, of course, what came to my mind immediately with this whole so-called crisis is the Monroe Doctrine and the Cuban Missile Crisis. In other words, we claimed through the Monroe Doctrine that Russia had no business sticking its nose into our hemisphere, and therefore we were going to threaten possible military and certainly embargoes on Russia and blockades. And yet now the West is in the Russian hemisphere, and nobody's talking about the Putin doctrine as opposed to the Monroe Doctrine, and they're encircling Russia. And also NATO is set up under the auspices of the UN. If you look at the actual incorporation documents of NATO, it is done with reference and incorporated by reference to the United Nations. And I look at NATO as an embryonic military arm of a wished for world government. And Putin is threatened by that, which one could understand. In order to resolve a problem, we have to be able to look at both sides of the issue in order to try to come to some type of resolution and understand, as a lawyer, when I negotiate a deal, I always first look at the viewpoint of the person I'm negotiating with, because I want to know how I would think were I them. But here we have a situation that is looked upon in a very one-sided way. And whether it's investing or whether it's geopolitics, whatever everyone agrees upon is always wrong and always the wrong investment. Whatever people are buying, you should be selling. Whatever they're selling, you should be buying. And by the way, you said you were a leftist, so I'm going to call you a walking oxymoron. Leftist with integrity.
Thank you. No, I thank you, Bob. And by the way, you raised me. Well, let me just say this also, and I always say this to people because a lot of my friends, first of all, the truth is on this issue and on a lot of issues, I get much more airtime by conservatives, right? And a lot of my friends said, oh, you shouldn't go on those shows. I was on Tucker Carlson recently, for example. I got a lot of flack for that. And I said, look, first of all, I said, I'll talk to anyone. I want to talk to people who want to listen about what I have to say, and if someone gives me airtime, I'm happy to do it. And I said, Noam Chomsky used to say that the one guy who gave him airtime on prime time, the only guy was who, do you know? William F. Buckley.
Buckley, yeah. Although
on Crossfire,
yeah.
So.
Although Chomsky today has totally foregone all his prior convictions.
In a lot of ways, yeah, that's true. But at the time, he was very left-wing then. And again, Buckley didn't have a problem having him on, or others who he disagreed with. And I think we need to do that.
Yep.
And I need to say that because, and by the way, my parents, I had to learn this. My parents, they're very conservative. They're Trump supporters. They listen to Fox, they listen to Newsmax. We don't agree on many things, though we agree on a lot of things. And I'm not going to abandon my parents because we see differently politically. And I believe we have to, to disagree without being disagreeable. But on the issues you raised some important issues. In fact, some of the experts that I've read are calling the phenomenon you mentioned about NATO encircling Russia as a reverse Cuban Missile Crisis, right? It is the exact mirror image, right? And as you say, when Russia tried to put missiles in Cuba it almost led to a nuclear war, right? The US would not and did not tolerate that. In the same way, as you say, we should look at the Russian perspective and understand why they're unhappy that NATO's on their border, why they're unhappy that the US has missiles in Poland. And if you can't, see Russia, even if you view it as an adversary or even as an enemy, I don't think it should be viewed as an enemy, but even if you did, as you say, you must think how your enemies are thinking and how they view things, and that we could not make a few concessions to Russia on these points has brought us to where we are at. And again, unless you own up to that, you're not going to be able to diffuse the situation or to go forward in a peaceful way. And again, let's go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where in the end, how was it resolved? John F. Kennedy, through his brother Bobby, made a promise that if they took the missiles out of Cuba, that one, the U.S. would not invade Cuba, because that's why Fidel wanted missiles there, and two, the U.S. would quietly 6 months later take U.S. missiles out of Turkey, which was very upsetting to Khrushchev. So the point is, there was a give and take, right? And there was an understanding, okay, we don't like the missiles in Cuba, you don't like the missiles in Turkey, let's talk about it, let's deal with it. And by the way, let's allow each other to save face. So we're going to move those missiles out of Turkey, but don't go bragging about it. Okay. So none of that's been done here. Everything has been done to, one, withhold what I view are very small concessions to Putin. And that is, don't, just agree Ukraine isn't going to be in NATO, for example. Prevail upon the government of Kiev to stop attacking its own people in the Donbass. Recognize Russia's legitimate security concerns, which Russia has been asking for certainly since 2014, when the coup happened. The fact that we not only have refused that, but that we won't allow Putin to save face, that we continue to vilify the guy, portray him as some madman. Again, I think it led him to do what he did. And again, that's not to justify what he did, but we have to understand it. And now we're in a war, a bigger war in Ukraine. I think we're into the 6th day now, and there's going to be a lot of devastation, a lot of people dying. And the U.S. could really help play a moderating role by essentially giving Russia what it wanted to begin with, which again were not huge concessions. But you don't see that happening at all. The first response is, we're going to kick you out of the financial system and off the SWIFT banking system, and we're going to attack you hard and your people hard. And again, that's the other thing we have to understand. And that's the other thing that's baffling to me. It's not even, all this sanctions and all this bile is not just directed towards Putin and the government. It's directed towards average Russian people, right? And this anti-Russian hatred, where we're not going to sell Russian vodka. And, this is absolutely bizarre to me.
The Russians are the new anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, well, in a sense, yeah. I mean, they are the untouchables. And this is a great civilization. Of course, you've heard before even this invasion, the State Department claiming that Russia was not a civilization, that it was some sort of backward country. I guess they forgot who Tolstoy and Dostoevsky were, and Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich. But again, the American
Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah. And the American people that were so ignorant, that they don't remember those things either, and it's just very sad to me that we're at the point we are. And again, going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, there's a chance, God forbid, that we could have some sort of nuclear confrontation, whether intentional or accidental, given what's happening there and why and how we could risk that.
I raised with you earlier how oil has gone from minus $37.60, meaning that the oil company had to pay you to take the oil.
Just to hold it, right?
And now we're at 105, but before this crisis, we were already in the 90s. And yet, all of the media has been given their marching orders to blame the situation in Ukraine for the rising prices. And they call that inflation, even though it isn't. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. The price rise is a result of the increase in the money supply. But you won't hear anyone in the State of the Union tonight. Not one person will mention the central banks. And we have to remember that in the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, in their platform, their main planks of their platform, number one is there must be a central bank. And that's what this is all about. It's about that. It's about the military industrial complex. There's all kinds of deals. I'm already reading many articles about billions here and billions here, military aid to Germany, military aid to Ukraine. And if I didn't have some principles, I would have invested in Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, but I just can't bring myself to do it. And I wish I could, because my wife says the only thing that ever stood between me and $1 billion is principles.
Yeah.
I can't invest in these things. I also can't invest in drug companies, big drug companies. And so we have all these people making a fortune, the lobbyists, the bribe politicians. I saw a meme today that a kid asks the quintessential question, you know, how did I come to be born? And the mother always comes up with, you know, well, your father and I, we loved each other, and he planted a seed and then he watered it, and we had a vase, and that's how he did it. Well, now I saw one that says, how do you get what do you call it? Oh yeah, when you mix a clown with a thief, you get a politician. And that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. And people like you and people like myself, who maybe disagree on a million issues, abortion, homosexuals, whatever, on issues when it comes to freedom and when it comes to facts, you have to care about facts, because when you care about facts, you have character. I always say, I will never lie to promote my point of view. If I can't make the case for my point of view without lying, then I don't have much of a case.
Right.
Unfortunately, today, there are very few people like yourself, and they will lie. Facts mean nothing to them. Good example you gave at the beginning with the Russian nonsense, which, even though I couldn't stand Trump, because compared to me, Trump is a socialist, but easily a socialist compared to me. But I'm not going to lie about Trump. If he does something wrong, I'll say it. If he does something right, I'll give him credit. That's what any decent person does. In fact, getting back to Kennedy, how much difference was there really in those days between the presidential candidates? Going back to the Kennedy days, everybody was essentially on the same page.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of bipartisan agreement and cooperation, you know.
Are you familiar with Operation Northwoods?
I am a little, though I can't recall what it is off the top of my head. Please tell me.
Well, you know, we were talking about the Cuban invasion plans of the CIA. Kennedy received a letter from the Joint Chiefs of Staff suggesting that America murder Americans on cruise ships in the Caribbean and use that as a subterfuge to invade Cuba. And Kennedy, to his great credit, according to Bobby Kennedy, he said, I thought we were human beings. That was his answer. And the CIA didn't like that answer. And all of a sudden, there was a magic bullet. It was very magical. It went from one guy to another, in the ear, in the mouth. Out there.
Oh, right.
All right. And of course, Bobby Kennedy's father had a very suspicious, similar happenstance. And so we have to, as you are, be truth seekers. But unfortunately, evil hates truth. Evil is the enemy of truth. And anyone who's a truth seeker can be on my team no matter what, as long as they're going to be honest and discuss things as we are doing in an honest and sincere way. I mean every word I say, just like I'm sure you do. And if you disagree, I believe that it's a sincere disagreement. And it's not just a fabricated concoction to promote some kind of strange agenda. So now everybody's going to be saying the two of us should be incarcerated.
I'm sure.
And tried for treason, according to Romney. You heard that quote from Romney?
I did.
Yeah.
Which is a bit surprising coming from him, because he tends to be more of a moderate, you know. And again, you raised some good points. I mean, this thing about the military-industrial complex we have to focus on. Again, that was a term coined by Dwight D. Eisenhower, right? And again, when he coined it, they didn't know from military-industrial complex. I mean, now, I mean, what we have is a military-industrial complex dwarfs, obviously, what existed then. And you see, you know, as you said, oil prices are rising. The oil companies are very happy for this conflict so that they can increase their profits. Even before the invasion, you had companies like Raytheon and Lockheed publicly saying the Ukraine crisis is good for them. And it has been. Their stocks are through the roof. If you look at all the defense contractors, their stocks are way up. And
well,
so, yeah.
There's something called ESG, politically correct investing for the woke corporations. Well, the fact of the matter is they are preventing and impeding all manners of energy exploration. So we can have windmills and a bunch of birds cut to ribbons. The fact of the matter is, whether people like it or not, we would starve without carbon fuels. And all these spoiled millennial brats and baby boomers, they don't know what it is to suffer, but they're going to find out, trust me. And, the Soviets, the Russians, they're a very sturdy people. They have known suffering, not like Americans. If you take a credit card away from an American, it's life-threatening. They can't do without their, for an American, if the steak isn't done well, it's a crisis for them. I see it all the time in restaurants. People go nuts because their steak isn't done well. And the Russians, the Russians I speak to, they lived in a little tiny room where they shared a bathroom and a kitchen with other families. They were glad to have some bread on the table. And they're not people that you can buckle very easily. And on the buckling issue, what is your perception of the real facts on the ground there now, militarily? Because, you're seeing all this in the media. Yeah. Oh, Putin is failing. He's losing. He's buckling. And the Ukrainians are defeating them. And Zelensky, not Zelensky, what's his name?
Zelensky.
Zelensky is out there like Judah the Maccabee. I saw a liberal Jewish journal referring to him as Judah the Maccabee. Judah the Maccabee was a guy who would rather die than violate the Torah, the Bible of the Jews. Zelensky is an atheist. So I don't think he's Judah the Maccabee, but look what they do. They create these idols. We've become a population of idol worshipers.
Yeah, I see posts of women saying they're in love with him, and yeah. Bizarre stuff, right.
They're throwing him hotel keys like Tom Jones.
Exactly. Well, again, it is hard to know totally about the situation on the ground, but I mean, the latest I read right before this interview was that Russia was entering Kiev. I mean, the truth is they have moved fairly quickly in terms of, from what it appears, to subduing a very large country. Now, that's not to say, how this is going to result. Again, some people point to Iraq, where, the U.S. overthrew the government there very quickly, but then the resistance lasted for many years. You could have that happen in Ukraine. So it's really hard to know. I do think that the Russians and the Ukrainians want some sort of negotiated settlement. They are meeting for the second day today. We'll see if they can get one. Believe me, I hope they do, because this could get ugly. I mean, if this continues to go on, we know how wars go, right? There'll be more civilian casualties. There'll be more destruction to cities, and those who are fighting will be more tolerant of that because they will become tired and desperate and whatnot. So, I certainly hope that there's a negotiated solution, because, again, this idea that there could be a long-lasting resistance is very possible. And one reason is also foreign fighters are coming into the battle. So, and of course, we see the EU funding, sending, for the first time, sending military assistance to a country in conflict, which, they've said they won't do. So it could get uglier than it is now. So I would hate to predict. I can only say my hope is that the peace comes soon, that they have an agreement that they can live with, because we already have two agreements, the Minsk agreements, which the Security Council unanimously approved, that have not been abided by, mostly by Ukraine. So I do hope they can get a deal, and a deal they can stick to and will stick to.
Okay, in the couple of minutes we have left, tell our viewers how they can follow you, how they can get their book, your book rather, and just to follow what you're doing and any articles you may write, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Bob. So first of all, they can go to me, find me on Twitter at Daniel M. Kovalik, Kovalik. And an easy way, they can certainly get my book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, at your local bookstore. Even if they don't have it, they could order it. But if you go to skyhorsepublishing.com, look up my name, you'll see all my books, and they have links to where you can buy them. So that's an easy one-stop shopping place for that. And
it's the plot to scapegoat Russia.
That is right. That is right.
Also a subtitle, how the CIA and the deep state conspired to vilify Russia. But I think if they just put in the plot to scapegoat Russia and your name, Daniel Kovalik, that should be sufficient, I would say.
It should be. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, it's indeed a pleasure.
I enjoyed it, Bob, very much.
I hope to stay in touch with you.
Me too.
There's the old story about Diogenes and the going around with the candle.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked him, why are you going around with a candle? He said, I'm looking for an honest man. And I feel I found one today.
Oh, thank you, Bob. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
I appreciate you very much, and may God bless you.
And you too, Bob. I hope we meet up someday.
Yes, in America, maybe.
Yes.
What's left? Anyway,
Thank you.
God bless. Take care.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.